It's time for The Clash. Now, among the outrage over the BBC's shocking list of highest paid stars this week, topped by ultimate wokester Gary Lineker on a £1.3 million salary, the bombshell revelation that millions no longer trust the Beeb to report fairly slipped under the radar. So listen to this. In the BBC's latest annual report, just 51% of UK adults think the public service broadcast is effective at providing news and current affairs that is impartial. That's down from 56% on the previous year, according to an Ipsos Mori poll of over 16s. That's the equivalent of some 3 million Brits who could have lost faith in Auntie in just the last 12 months alone. Now, we asked the BBC about the growing lack of faith from viewers that their news service is impartial, and hilariously, they actually disputed their own figures, believe it or not. A spokesman told us tonight, with the easing of COVID-19 restrictions, this survey was conducted face-to-face in 2021-22. The previous year's survey in 2021 had to be undertaken via telephone mobile because of the pandemic. Because of the difference in method, the results are not directly comparable, so are not repeated in our report. As the old saying goes, denial ain't just a river in Egypt. Let's get real here. The BBC's tick-box descent into wokeness has seen them fail to reflect public opinion on everything from Brexit and COVID to Boris Johnson smashing the red wall to pieces. BBC chiefs on six-figure salaries have let their liberal bias bleed into programming and embolden the likes of newsreader Emily Maitlis and former Newsnight policy editor Lewis Goodall. Both of them, thank goodness, have now run off to some left-wing radio station. So, what do you think? Is BBC News impartial? Email me, dan@gbnews.uk. Tweet your thoughts to @gbnews. Our poll running there too. To help you make up your mind on this, though, let me bring in former BBC journalist Robin Aitken, the actor Christopher Biggins, and two famous BBC faces, the royal commentator Jenny Bond and the journalist and television presenter Dame Esther Ranson. So, Robin Aitken, you used to work at the BBC, but this is fascinating, isn't it? Over the course of a year, 3 million Brits effectively saying, no, we no longer trust the BBC, and just 51% now saying that the public service broadcaster is impartial. In reality, Robin, 99% of people should think the BBC is impartial, right?
Look, I think there are a number of things going on here, but it's clear that the penny has dropped. There was a time when people imbibed with their mother's milk the idea that the BBC was impartial. My experience through my 25 years at the BBC as a reporter was that it wasn't. And that was very clear to me, and I think it's becoming much clearer to a lot of other people. And I think one of the reasons for that is because we've come through a period in British politics which has been very polarised, and the BBC actually failed to reflect fairly the two sides in those big debates, particularly in the Brexit debate. I think Brexit was something which threw into sharp relief just where the BBC's heart really lies. And on that big and very important issue, they failed lamentably to be impartial.
Dame Esther Ranson, you disagree?
Well, the first thing I would say is it's very, very important that we stay sceptical. Whoever we listen to, even if we listen to you, Dan, because sorry about that. What we've learned through the Ukraine tragedy is that Russia believes completely, implicitly, what they're told by the state-run media there. So therefore, the war, the terrible, tragic, desperately important war, which is putting the whole of Europe at risk, they are, 80% of them are still behind it. So it's really important that all of us stay sceptical. That being said, if you have a look at that survey that you've quoted, you will find that the number of people that don't think the BBC is effective and impartial has also dropped by about the same amount. And the fascinating thing is, if you ask people, as this survey did, who really regularly follow the news, which broadcaster, which medium they most trust, 48% say the BBC, and the next highest is 8% who say Sky News. So the BBC, we turn to the BBC in moments of crisis. And the BBC, I know, and I'm sure Jenny knows, that the BBC takes that responsibility desperately seriously. And the Director General is many things, but he's not a lefty liberal.
Biggins, there has been a change, though, hasn't there? I mean, yeah, I was someone that when Jenny Bond was reporting on the royal family, I tended to trust what the BBC told me. But Biggins, things have changed over the past few years. I mean, do you still watch Biggins' BBC News and trust what they tell you?
I don't. I mean, I was always one who would switch at 6 o'clock in the evening. Whatever I was watching, I would turn to BBC One because I thought that was the best news we had. And it was fantastic. However, I do think over the last couple of years, it has turned into something very political. And I love you, Esther, but I just disagree with you because I think the problem is that they're not telling the truth. And I think they're so biased that it's a real problem that we have. And I don't think it's a problem that should be taught or listened to or even, I mean, I think the radio, for instance, I love Radio 2, and that is changing now. There's so many things that are happening with the BBC, and I don't know where to go. I mean, I used to love it. I don't love it anymore.
Jenny Bond, have you noticed that change that Christopher Biggins talks about?
Christopher, maybe listen to 5 Live, and there you will hear a very broad spectrum of opinion. I work with Robin alongside. I've done one more year than you, Robin. I was there for 26 years at the BBC. I wrote the news, I edited the news, I reported the news, and I presented the news. And never, ever was I told what I should say, or did I see any bias whatsoever. All my bosses wanted to know was that as a journalist, I was getting the facts as quickly as I could, as accurately as I could, and getting them out there. And as a specialist, giving my analysis of it. But never did anyone tell me what I should say. And Robin, I don't know what your politics was at the BBC. I have no idea. I had no idea of the people I presented with or my colleagues. I didn't know what their politics were, and it didn't matter because we're professional.
Robin, how do you respond to that?
If I could come in there, Jenny, and it's great to see you again, Jenny. And yes, we were young reporters back in the radio newsroom back in the day. I think that the BBC's bias is evident in so many areas of its coverage. For instance, the reporting of the Supreme Court decision 10 days ago on the abortion rights thing in the US. The BBC's coverage of that in every outlet, and I know this because I've checked through many of them. I've checked through the coverage because I'm interested in it. The tone of all that coverage is that this is a regressive and bad thing to have happened, that the Supreme Court was wrong to overturn Roe v. Wade. And that is just taken as read by the BBC. Now, Jenny, you say you didn't know what the politics of your colleagues was back when you worked at the BBC. I knew very well what the politics of my colleagues was, because I found myself outside the mainstream. Look, I'm unashamedly someone who's always been on the right. I mean, I'm a right-wing person, if you like. I'm not an extreme right-wing person, I'm just a mainstream right-wing type person. And I know that there was a great deal of prejudice, for instance, in the 80s against Mrs. Thatcher. I mean, she was loathed in the BBC, wasn't she, Jenny? I mean, you be honest now. Did you know anybody in the BBC newsroom who was a supporter of Mrs. Thatcher, aside possibly from myself?
Jenny?
And me.
Well, I didn't quiz them about it. I simply got on with the reporting of it, and I reported on Mrs. Thatcher myself. I reported on her leaving Downing Street that time with tears in her eyes. I was there and on the air. I didn't question anyone's politics about it. I don't know, Robin. You leave me speechless, particularly about the Supreme Court. And if there was some bias on the BBC about that, which I don't believe there was, well, good for them.
Yeah,
but that's the point, isn't it?
That is exactly the point. The thing is, Jenny,
I'm saying I have no idea if there was any bias, but personally, I'm a woman who believes passionately about the if I was reporting on it, I would say both sides of the argument. But you've got me there on the abortion.
You're a BBC woman to your core, and I always admired you.
I haven't worked for 20 years.
I thought you did a great job. But look, the very fact that you see nothing wrong with the fact that the BBC is actually quite determinedly biased on the question of abortion and the so-called right to choose is exactly my point. Your sort
Well, I
of
don't think it
opinion
is.
on an issue like that was completely unexceptional within the BBC. In fact, that opinion was shared by the great majority of your colleagues, and that is the problem. Don't you understand that we all have to pay for the BBC, and therefore we have a right to have our views represented as well as your views?
Dame Esther, do you want to respond to that, Dame Esther?
I think it is quite interesting because Mrs. Thatcher helped me launch Childline. Childline was launched on the BBC. Now, Childline is not impartial. Childline is adamantly against child abuse and neglect. We do not accept that any child should suffer, and we take that view very strongly, very passionately, and so did Mrs. Thatcher. Now, Mrs. Thatcher had many criticisms to make about the BBC. Not for one moment was she a fan herself, but at the same time, she saw the launch of Childline, she supported it, and she gave us a reception at 10 Downing Street. Now, I, at that time, was a BBC journalist, a BBC presenter, and a BBC producer. But I saw nothing wrong about working in partnership with her on a subject in which I am not impartial. When it comes to a fraught issue like abortion, there is a gender gap, isn't there? An awful lot of women regard this as a woman's decision about her own autonomy and her own body. And one of the good things that has happened in the BBC is that more and more women have responsible roles on programmes like Woman's Hour, but in programmes across the board.
Yeah. But I think Robin's point, though, is that obviously in America, this is a hot-button political issue where the country is essentially split 50-50. And if you watch the BBC with their coverage of Roe v. Wade, that's not what you would believe. Christopher Biggins, final word to you. Can the BBC win you back in some way, or do you feel like you've lost faith with their news service after the past few years?
I hope it can bring me back, but I don't think it can. I think I'm lost out to it now, very, very sadly. And I would just like to say before we finish that Amanda would make a very good Prime Minister.
She would, wouldn't she?
Earlier, and she
Amanda Patel for PM.
I'm going to give my vote to Amanda.
Yes, good point. Very good point. She'll love that. The entertainer, Christopher Biggins, former BBC journalist Robin Aiken, the royal commentator Jenny Bond, and the famed BBC presenter Dame Esther Ransom. Thank you all